Just want to give you a bit of background to what you're going to see over the next 20 minutes or so. Way back in July, I got a phone call from Julian Turner. He said to me, "Are you listening to Sunday Opinion?" I said, "No." I was actually having a bonfire in the garden, which was much more fun. He said, "Have a listen to it." So I did. And David North and Anthony Pugh were both on Sunday Opinion, talking about a report that was produced by Treasury in July and was issued about Manx Radio. And Anthony said on air that the report that was produced was to stimulate debate, but it also looked at the way that government funded Manx Radio for public service broadcasting and said, look, if they want proper public service broadcasting, then it has to be funded. He made a comment that caused me to call the station, the manning line that followed the programme. And the comment was that one of the options was to give Manx Radio to the BBC, or offer it to the BBC. And that sent a few shivers down my spine, because I didn't like the fact that perhaps sort of our local station would be given over to the BBC, and wondered indeed whether the BBC wanted it. So I put an open invitation to Anthony to say, should we meet? Can we meet? You know, if you're thinking that way, and I think we've got areas of common ground that we should talk about. So we did agree to meet, and that happened in August, and we had a very good meeting, and we had a nice discussion, and we talked about one or two ideas that might shape the face of the future of broadcasting on the Isle of Man. And I said to Anthony, look, I'll put some notes together, and let's have a look and see what we come up with. In October, we had a couple of meetings in the meantime, and in October, Anthony asked me if I could present the document that I was preparing to the board of Manx Radio. I declined at the time and said no, but I was very happy to present it to him, which I did. And then I got another call a couple of weeks later and was summoned to a board meeting at Manx Radio to give this presentation because they were slightly unhappy that I was talking to one or two MHKs, and I thought I was doing the right thing in stimulating debate. So the proposal, the discussion document, and this is what this is a proposal, but it's very much a discussion document, and I'd like to emphasise that. Went to a number of the MHKs, they had the presentation, and it also, a copy of it went to the Department of Economic Development. And then you know that in October, when the Timwood sitting came around to discuss Manx Radio, on the back of this document, they deferred that until December and have now set up a select committee to look into public service broadcasting. So I want to share this document with you, and as I say, there are very few people who have actually seen it. I started off by saying the Isle of Man really should be very proud of its broadcasting heritage, and I truly believe that. In 1964, when Manx Radio started broadcasting, they were the very first commercial radio station in the British Isles, a good 10 years ahead of anybody else in the UK. The government has always really had a hand in Manx Radio. From about 1960, they made approaches to the UK government to try and get a licence to have a radio station on the Isle of Man broadcasting to the whole of the UK. The UK government didn't want that to happen. We were talking about the heady days of the pirate radio stations. But eventually, and reluctantly, the UK government agreed, and Manx Radio was granted a licence to broadcast under the Post Office Telegraphy Act. So it very quickly became an integral part of island life, and has been so since 1964. In 2001, the government commissioned a report that was called the Darwin Report, at a cost of some £400,000. And that recommended the way forward, a new constitution for Manx Radio, and basically opened the doors to other commercial broadcasters to come in when it was approved by Timwood. Energy FM started broadcasting in 2002, very much targeting a younger audience, and 3FM started in 2004 as a music radio station. A lot of people ask me why we don't do more speech content on 3FM. And that's because we are a licensed music station with 25% speech only and 75% music. But it was a very refreshing style, and we found favour with audiences on the Isle of Man. And Manx Radio and Energy were actually both influenced by what we were doing on air. Now, we live in a different world. 2004 doesn't seem that long ago, but in technology terms, it's eons ago. I'm 58, 59 this year. This is a very clear picture to me of what we had in our homes. But these days, we've moved on to different delivery systems, how people receive their information, receive their entertainment. That device in the pocket is a lot more than it used to be. We've got iPods, we've got iPads, you hear of those on a daily basis. People couldn't live without them these days. The 90s were really the decade that saw computers and various electronics evolving, as well as the internet. It was the sort of realm of geeks in those days. But it changed in the noughties, and these days, sort of business entertainment and technology, the way we use it is far different from even a decade ago. So the devices in the pocket are emptier, but they can do so much more. And the storage is unbelievable. If you think about sort of what you had with regard to memory sticks no more than a few years ago, these days you can pop into Walton's or Colburn's or anywhere and buy a 2 terabyte hard drive. 2 terabyte hard drive, unbelievable, for under £100. The cost of technology is just coming down. And has been integrated very much so into business. So in the face of all that technology, where does local radio fit in as far as the Isle of Man's concerned? Well, in the Treasury report, it makes a comment there that it's evident that Manx Radio has a clear vision of itself as the Isle of Man's public service broadcaster, with a focus on locally generated news, current affairs and community programming. I'm not disagreeing with that at all. But when we look at how public service is defined, public service broadcasting is defined in the Act of 2007, it very clearly states that it's a means of broadcasting service that's provided as a public service for disseminating information, education and entertainment responsive to the taste, interests and concerns of the whole community, where programmes reflect the varied elements which make up the culture of the people of the island. So, those are very, very important words within the way that the public service is currently defined. The BBC are public service broadcasters, but they deliver their public service broadcasting through a whole diverse range of stations. Not just Radio 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but television stations, local stations. It's a very diverse way of reaching all of the population. Can all of those elements, as far as the Isle of Man's concerned, be achieved through one station now, without that station really sounding so schizophrenic that it doesn't please anybody? The latest Treasury report showed Manx Radio received from government in the last financial year £1.662 million. That was made up of subvention, capital programme, which is ongoing, some transmission costs, which Manx Radio don't pay for, and they had a one-off restructuring fund. So that's due to fall to £1.187 million in this financial year. There are 20 full-time staff, 1 contract, 4 part-time and 43 freelance staff on Manx Radio's payroll, making up 69% of their expenditure. Their wage bill for 11-12 was £1.436.5 million in wages. In addition to public money, Manx Radio also sells airtime and derives other trading income, and the largest of that comes from transmitter maintenance from the Department of Home Affairs and also the BBC and IKEVA. This quote is taken from the report, by the way. And then when you actually analyse what we're getting for that, if you look here, you've got Manx News and Travel with 10.7% of the output, current affairs 10.7%, and community programming 8.9%. The remaining output, over 50%, is other stuff, which includes music. Again, that's taken from the report. In terms of income, Manx Radio's income, 11-12 in the last financial year, was just over 2 million. Their expenditure was over 2 million, and there was a £50,500 loss, and a £15,000 loss predicted for this year. So it's evident that government money is vital to Manx Radio, but is that proportionate in terms of what Manx Radio receives? 3FM was licensed in 2004, and as I've said, as a music station, so our output's 75%. Our 25% speech has to include everything. That includes commercials, presenter links, news, everything. And our target market of adults over 30 is a mix of music, adult contemporary music, and the speech content is made up, as I've said, from those things that you can see on the screen. We currently employ 2 directors, working directors, 9 full-time staff and 4 freelancers. 3FM's expenditure on staff in 11-12 was just over £250,000, nearly 256,000. And our summary of our financial position there, if you can see, in the year 9-10, we made quite a good profit, dropped in 10-11. This year, although I'm just doing the final accounts, we're looking at nearly an £8,000 loss. Now, I took the station over at the end of 2011, and that is as a result of an exercise to clear out the depreciation. I've depreciated over £49,000 worth of equipment, which I've written off the books this year, and we've had some building maintenance that we've had to do as well. So that's the true accounting picture, but in reality, it's we actually did make a profit this year. Energy is also privately owned, employs 1 permanent staff, there are 6 freelancers, and 1 director. And their financial position I can't give you because I'm not privy to that kind of information, but I think at the moment estimated revenues are around 100,000, and I don't think the company's making a profit at the moment. In 2012, in the summer of last year, Energy relocated into our building. It was a result of some discussions that June Turner and I had, and also his father, Nod, and Charles, his uncle. And I said that maybe it was a time to actually look at how we could save some money in terms of sharing resources. So they moved into the building. We now share a building. We share a single news resource, and there's some sales support that's given there. And in turn, we get transmission support. In other words, if you look at the transmission sites that we all have around the island, we're paying for a cabinet, Energy are paying for a cabinet. It makes sense to, and we're both paying rentals on those things. It's best to actually pull them together and just have one cabinet in the site. So the effect is about a 30% saving overall. Are you all familiar with RAJAR? RAJAR is the research authority. It's the only means that we have of audience research on the island. I don't think it's a particularly robust form of research, but it's the only one we've got. And it's employed through a physical diary research. If you've ever seen a physical diary, a RAJAR diary, honestly, they're just so difficult to fill in. But we are in RAJAR, Manx Radio are in RAJAR. We do get some advertising out of it, some national advertising. Costs about £12,000 a year to be in RAJAR. Energy don't subscribe to it, and it sort of balances it off. In fact, Manx Radio did say in the report that they have decided not to accept nationalised advertising anymore, but nonetheless they still remain in RAJAR. These figures might be very hard for you to see on the board, I appreciate that, so I'll just talk you through them. This is 3FM's audience research. They research a base of 71,000 people. Now, I've said that our target audience is 30 plus, it's around about 32 really. So if we look at, and it's female, that's our target. If you look at women in the 25 to 34-year-old bracket, that's 68%. Is what we have in that audience. Women 35 to 44, 54%, and then it starts to drop off 38%, 27%, etc. In the males, in that target market, you're looking at 50%, 52%, and then dropping off, which gives us a sort of an all-adults reach here, which is 37%. these were the figures that came out in June. There were some came out in September, which took us up 1%. If you look at Manx Radio's figures in the same age bracket, you'll see that women 25 to 34, 28%, 35 plus, 41%. Similar figure when it comes down to males, but a 53% all island reach. And the interesting figure on this is women over 65 and men over 65. You'll see there's a figure, well, 55 plus is 69%, and then 65 plus is 78%. And that's sort of a figure that actually fluctuates sometimes into the low 90s. If you look at 3FM's figure, the 65 plus audience is 9% of women. So, you know, that gives you a clear picture, whether you believe it or not, of where that audience is. Again, this has come out of the report. You look at the weekly audience for Manx Radio. So we can accept that the broadcasting day, in effect, is 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. Very much so. But these peaks that you see here, Manx Radio, are news. If you look, you're looking at between 7 o'clock and it peaking at sort of between 8 and 8:30, and then peaking in at lunchtime, again at sort of drive time, and then again around about midnight. 3FM has peaks as well, but those peaks are less defined and they smooth out. They smooth out more rather than dropping so dramatically. So that's how it breaks down on a half-hour basis. Social media, we all have social media. We all look at websites, Facebook and Twitter. We all join in on that. And I can give you some statistics in terms of where 3FM lies with regards to the website visits that we get. You're looking at nearly 2 million page views. Facebook and Twitter, very active, and a good smattering of viewers there. Energy, I can't give you any web figures because they're not available to me, nor are Manx Radio's, but I can give you some Facebook and Twitter figures to look at there for Manx Radio and for Energy. This is a diagram that basically shows you the current state of things like Facebook. 845 million monthly active users on Facebook. It shows you basically the reason it's designed to be there. It just shows you the increase and the size of social media. So I asked the question in the discussion document, can 3 radio stations survive on the Isle of Man with our population size? And I think if you were going to base it on population and population alone, you'd have to sort of say, I don't know, I really don't know, I think not. But we have a very fundamental difference on the Isle of Man. We are a nation, albeit a small one, we're a nation. And 3FM and Energy have both demonstrated those demands for alternatives, as well as social media, and I believe that if we work together, we can provide a first-class service that is cost-effective. We're not alone in the challenges that we face in terms of local radio. It's the same all over the country. There was a radio journalist that put a very interesting blog together, which I've included in my report, or my discussion document. And he made a point that says, without local, what are you faced with? You're faced with, if you want a playlist, then you've got iTunes or Spotify. If you just want a playlist. If you've got an iPhone or an Android phone, you can download this free app, which will give you live streaming of radio stations all around the world in as many different genres as you want. If you want jazz, blues, whatever you want, whether you want talk, whether you want sport, there's an app that will give you them live all the way down, all around the world. Happy to show it to you if you're interested. But if you take local hours away from it, then what are you left with? You're left with nothing more than what's being offered on the web. And that's sad. That's really sad. If we looked at potentially a way forward then to come together in a true public-private sector partnership, which we're being told by the government is something that they want to foster, they want to have more public-private sector partnerships, as a way of driving the economy forward. I've put forward in this discussion document for consideration that the 3 radio stations combine facilities and resources to deliver what I've called the Manx Broadcasting Corporation. The government made already a substantial investment in the Manx Radio building and the infrastructure. It's just been recently refurbished and is an ongoing capital programme, as we see. And so the resources up there, it's easy to put 2 other radio stations in there, it's not a problem. The most radical change, however, would be to the levels of staffing required. So if I can just run you through very quickly what I see the structure of the MBC being. You have an overarching structure which I call the Manx Broadcasting Corporation. 3FM and Energy looking at being a merged company, and then Radio Manx Limited. Representation from those 2 companies would sit on the overarching Manx Broadcasting Corporation. And this company, as the private sector company, then operates the 3 brands under license. Operates Manx Radio under license, so you've got 3 brands. How that would work, if you looked at Energy, that would be serving a 15 to 25-year-old format, age group, with a chart music format. A tabloid news style, which is very much like, if you think of it as being The Sun or the Daily Star or whatever. Short, sharp news bulletins, local information that's relevant to the audience, and a young, upbeat presentation style. You could have this is very similar to what's running at the moment. You're bearing in mind that the broadcasting day again is 7 till 7. We use, as do Energy, quite a lot of voice tracking. Voice tracking is it's a really good system whereby all the programming, all the tracks are listed, and when you want to insert a voice track, you can do that. So you can do a 4-hour program in about 20 minutes, and it sounds live. If you looked at news and weather on the half-hour, traffic reports and community information. Saturday, we're looking at afternoon being voice tracked, but mid-afternoon, again using a staff presenter, your breakfast show, and then club classics in there. Sundays, again, using quite a lot of voice tracking to keep costs down. 3FM, if 3FM targeted a 25 to 50-year-old audience with an adult contemporary style music, again a tabloid news style, but think of it more as sort of the Daily Mail. Local information relevant to the audience, a more mature presentation style, and a format very similar to what we do now. We get to afternoon to 6 o'clock, and then it's voice tracked after that. It's music presenter linked voice tracking right the way throughout the night. And then we also do news on the hour and half hourly between 7 till 9, traffic reports, community, what's on, etc. Again, 3FM on a Saturday, very similar to what happens there. In the afternoon, you've got music and sports highlights. And then Sunday is predominantly voice track programming. So if we come on to Manx Radio, if Manx Radio were then to say, right, let's target a 50-plus audience, because that's where Radar tells us where the bulk of our audience is, we move on to a sort of a more easy listening format. Now that doesn't mean to say Mantovani, etc. Just because you're over 50 doesn't mean you're dead. You can, there's still stuff in the charts that you would play, Adele, various things like that. But on a more sort of easy listening style. So you're not getting this real jump in music. It's sort of more, it's more sort of smooth throughout the day. Looking at the news, being more upmarket, I'm thinking more sort of Telegraph, Observer, Times, that sort of thing, with a bigger emphasis on current affairs. Local information for programming relevant to the audience and a more mature presentation style. So how would that affect the daily programming? Okay, if we looked between 7 o'clock and 9 o'clock in the morning, and we looked at a breakfast news programme that had a half-hour rolling news and current affairs, like the BBC do. They repeat the news every half an hour, but perhaps with a different story in there. What you're going to get between that 2-hour block, you're going to get everybody driving to work that are going to be absolutely up to date with all of the current stories of the day. Then between 9 and 12, let's look at a mid-morning show live with featured guests. Now, Anthony has made a comment that speech-based programming is £1,000 an hour, music-based programming is £100 an hour. That's not strictly true. If you were going to go out and do outside broadcasts, and you were going to go out and do outside interviews, and you were going to do all of that sort of thing, then yes, of course it's expensive. It requires more resource. But if you're actually bringing people in to the studio, or if you're actually doing telephone interviews, it's not as expensive. So that mid-morning section, studio guests, public information, community in there. Between 12 and 2, go back into the half-hour rolling news format again, but you've got more to talk about with regard to sport, and you've got business going on that's been going on throughout the day. Afternoon music and features for between 2 and 4, and then 4 o'clock, again, that 2-hour block between 4 and 6, back into your rolling news format, a roll-up of the business news of the day. So that would change more on each half hour as we go. And then from 6 o'clock onwards, music programming, voice tracked. Saturday, Breakfast Live, Sound of the 60s, great programme. So why not repeat it in the evening, later on? Saturday sport between 1 o'clock and 6 o'clock, very much an emphasis on sport for Manx Radio on that Saturday. And then you can put in specialist music hours, and then voice track music as we go on. How would Sunday look? Well, you've still got your Sunday Breakfast Live, your Manx language programme, you could have a couple of hours of that in the morning, still got Sunday Opinion, still got Man in Line. Between 2 o'clock and 6 o'clock on a Sunday, easy listening, voice tracked. Why not between 6 and 7 do a songs of praise? I don't mean go out and record a church service, but you could get during the week, you could get people from some of the different vicars coming into the studio. You mix it with things like Alan Jones, etc., etc. So you've got an hour of, if you like, religious programming there. And then between 7 o'clock and 10 o'clock, why not repeat your Manx language programming? And then again, in the evening, voice track music. So that's not a definitive, but that's a shape. And a lot of people have said, well, it's destroying, you're looking to destroy Manx Radio or take away the news and current affairs. You're not. That process increases the amount of hours. You're looking at 6 hours a day of news and current affairs as a minimum. The staff is the biggest one, obviously, and the biggest reduction being in freelance personnel. Technology playing a bigger part in delivering this content, and voice track programs reducing costs. The staff structure, you're looking at, say, a managing director, a couple of accounts, admin and accounts. You only need one managing director, one program director, one technical director, one sales director, and one head of news. That's all you need. You don't need 3 for 3 different stations. And it basically, I think I'm probably a little bit light on the news there. I think the news needs to probably come up by 1 more staff journalist and probably 1 or 2 more freelancers. But the idea is that you've got around about 28 to 30 people that you can then run the whole Manx Broadcasting Corporation on. As I said, biggest overheads outside of cost, the building costs, rates and rent, other sizable costs, the PRS, PPL, Radar membership. Manx Radio isn't encumbered by rent or transmission costs, which they value at some £67,000. The establishment costs in 11-12 for Manx Radio was just over £74,000, so that's rates, cleaning, electricity, etc., and bandwidth connectivity. And in comparison, 3FM's costs were £71,000, £71,500, so not dissimilar. But again, of course, you're looking at sort of IT as being a big cost there, but that's you save money there. And other costs, as far as we're concerned, our transmission network is just over £22,000. So if we looked at the NBC then, if the rent, if it's not included in Manx Radio cost, but if we looked at expenditure on establishment, you can put about 100,000 in there for that. Transmission, around about £85,000. Engineering support, about 118,000. So these are costs to government. This is what I'm suggesting, that the government picks up these costs. Licenses and copyrights, Radio TT as an underwrite, £35,000. You're talking about a government contribution there of £438,000, around about £500,000. So you take away this subvention, you replace it with the cost of actually running the structure, the basic costs. In terms of income, advertising sales, I mean, Manx Radio, when you strip out and you have a look in that proposal, that document that was produced in July, and Anthony Pugh said this on air, the value to actual sales, advertising sales for Manx Radio is around about £500,000. 3FM is about £500,000 also. So conservatively, about a million there across all three stations. You get, there are other revenues that Manx Radio gets from engineering support. So you're looking at a total income of about 1.2 million. Expenditure on staff. Now I've put those heads of departments on quite low salaries. When I say low salaries, I'm talking £45,000, £45,000 per annum. So the staff costs come down to around about 650,000, with operational expenses 300,000, and so the total costs there come in under £1 million. So that leaves us with a profit situation of around about £250,000, which then in a public-private sector partnership gets distributed between 3FM, Energy and the government. So there is a payback there. So total cost of the government, £500,000, potential returns, part of a profit share. We talked about local television earlier on with Paul, and I know Paul does a great job with his Manx Telecom television. We also run TVIM, which is a web-based service. If you haven't seen it, it's a nightly TV, it's a nightly news programme. This is part of what 3FM, it's a joint venture between 3FM and Greenlight, and we started broadcasting. We started with a weekly broadcast in July, and we now go nightly. And as I said, it's web-based. There was talk about television at one of these meetings not too long ago, which Paul covered. There was a report when Jeremy Hunt was Culture Secretary called the Shot Report. The key findings of that report were that in the long term, there was believed that all television will be delivered via IPTV, which is starting to happen now with smart TVs. But the BBC had a brief to get involved in this, and they allocated 40 million to local TV. Here, we don't have that. However, Cable and Wireless launched at the back end of last year their Sure TV product, which is like a local television channel, but again, it's web-based. The cost of local television is pretty high. You're looking, in terms of salary costs, you need a couple of journalists, presenters, full-time sound crew. You can look at about £120,000 to produce television programming on a daily basis. That could be wrapped in to the whole Manx Broadcasting Corporation at a cost of about £150,000. And the Isle of Man contributes over £4 million in terms of licenses. What we're saying is, let's get 150,000 of that back and put it into local TV. And that's not just TVIM, that covers people like Paul as well. So there we go. That's the discussion document for a public-private sector partnership between all three radio stations to form the Manx Broadcasting Corporation as a public-private sector partnership. All stations to be in one location, consolidate the staff, remove the subvention from Manx Radio, replacing that with meeting overheads and costs. We continue to sell advertising, we enhance the programming, we deliver a defined programming to the three sort of target markets that we're looking at, which covers the whole age range of the Isle of Man, and actually gives you consistency and you know what you're going to get. So I don't believe people are just going to listen to 3FM or people are just going to listen to Energy. They're going to do more than that. They're going to listen to all three stations, as the same way that, you know, a lot of people listen to Radio 1, Radio 2, Radio 4. You know, there's a lot of you in here, I would wager, Radio 4 listeners, but also listen to Radio 2. So it's a question of knowing what you're going to get and consistency of service. So the future of broadcasting on the Isle of Man, I believe, can be secured through this kind of partnership. Thank you very much.